Good morning. If everyone could please take their seats, we're ready to begin in a few minutes. Thank you. Should have a microphone more often. Okay. I would ask that you please rise for the arrival of His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor General of Canada.
Yes, always assume. Yeah. Should I bring mic as well?
Have a seat, please. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Robert Phillips, a director with the NASDAQ OMX Group, and I'm also the NASDAQ Relationship Manager for Canadian companies listed on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. It is our great honor to welcome His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor General of Canada, to NASDAQ this morning. We are thrilled with this opportunity to highlight the very special relationship of Canada and the United States. As Canada's New York consulate puts it so perfectly on its own website, Canada and the United States enjoy an economic partnership unique in the contemporary world. We don't just share a border or a history, we also share the greatest bilateral trading relationship in the world, with $1.9 billion worth of goods and services crossing the Canada-US border every single day. We are also delighted with the opportunity to highlight Canada's particular importance to NASDAQ. Under the leadership and vision of our CEO, Bob Greifeld, over the past 10 years, NASDAQ has become a global provider of technology and exchange solutions. We deliver trading and clearing across multiple asset classes, technology for exchanges and regulators, listing for securities, and communication services for public companies across 6 continents. This is especially evident with Canada, where NASDAQ provides the technology infrastructure for the CNSX exchange, as well as trading and regulatory platforms for Canadian broker-dealers. And NASDAQ is proud to be the U.S. listings exchange for 45 of Canada's leading public companies, representing a combined market capitalization of over $47 billion, certainly one of NASDAQ's largest international contingents. These companies include great innovators such as BlackBerry, Lululemon, OpenText, and 2 Canadian companies that are represented here today. Wyland is a global technology innovator that licenses over 3,000 patents to communications providers worldwide. Chief Financial Officer Sean McEwen has joined us here today. MDC Partners is a business transformation organization that utilizes technology, marketing, and data analytics to bring meaningful returns to the communications investments of multinational clients in Canada, the United States, Europe, and the Caribbean. MDC shares are traded on NASDAQ and the Toronto Stock Exchange. We are honored to have with us today David Doft, MDC's Chief Financial Officer, to moderate Governor General Johnston's presentation. David is a true thought leader in the media, advertising, technology, and digital space. Since joining MDC in 2007, David has helped build the business into a portfolio of 50 global marketing firms, expanding the company's digital expertise organically as well as through acquisitions. And David has led MDC's transformation from a $400 million to a $1 billion business. Thank you, David, for joining us here today. Your Excellency, NASDAQ is proud to be part of the special relationship between Canada and the United States. We are also very grateful for the leadership of Mr. John Prato, Canada's Consul General in New York, as well as the dedication of the Consul staff as we continue to work together to highlight and expand our relationship. We have been thrilled to have the Minister of Industry, Christian Paradis, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, John Baird, to ring NASDAQ's closing bell over the past year. And again, we are honored here today to welcome His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor General of Canada. Bienvenue au NASDAQ, Monsieur. And now please join me in welcoming Mr. John Prato, Consul General of Canada in New York, for further remarks. John.
Thank you so much, Robert. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, and a special hello to all the great high school students from the two finest high schools in New York. I consider myself one of the most fortunate people in the world to have this job. And I'm so proud to represent Canada in the greatest city in the world, New York City. And today, I'm especially proud of introducing to you a tremendously accomplished and visionary leader. His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, was sworn in as the 20th Governor General of Canada in October of 2010. And since that time, he has excelled in his role, managing to outpace the lofty expectations that followed his announcement. Mr. Johnston comes to the role of Governor General after a distinguished career as a student, teacher, and leader, having brought considerable influence to the top universities in Canada. However, I would be remiss if today I did not mention that while studying here in the United States at Harvard, our Governor General captained the ice hockey varsity team and was twice selected to the All-America team. He began his off-ice career in 1966 at the Faculty of Law at Queen's University, my alma mater, in Kingston, Ontario, moving next to the law faculty at the University of Toronto, after which in 1974 he was named Dean of Faculty of Law at the University of Western Ontario. In 1979, he became Principal and Vice Chancellor of McGill University in Montreal. And in June 1999, he became the 5th President of the University of Waterloo. It is no coincidence that this Governor General is such a strong proponent of innovation. Waterloo, Ontario is not only home to the university, which has consistently been named Canada's top university for innovation, it is also the home to BlackBerry and the Canadian Innovation Centre. Indeed, it is a city that is increasingly cited as an important global innovation hub. The Governor General's stewardship as President of the University of Waterloo has played no small role in that reputation. As the representative of the Queen in Canada, the Governor General carries out the duties as head of state. He is also Canada's Commander-in-Chief, playing a major role in recognizing the importance of the military at home and abroad. And fittingly, Canada's Governor Generals have established a tradition of encouraging excellence, presenting honors such as the Order of Canada, which recognizes lifetime achievement, meritorious service decorations, and a number of awards and trophies in the arts, social sciences, humanities, and sports. I say fittingly, because in the case of this particular Governor General, Canada has a head of state whose role has inspired him to truly encourage innovation, nurturing the mix of creativity, know-how, research, and business acumen that brings ideas to the market. And speaking of the market, what better forum for such a discussion than the NASDAQ? I'd like to thank our hosts today for welcoming us back to this amazing building, and I stress welcoming back. We have a strong relationship with the NASDAQ, and providing a resident forum for today's presentation. As Robert previously mentioned, no two countries have the relationship that Canada and the United States have. It's the largest two-way trading relationship in the world, some $742 billion a year. That's roughly $2 billion a day. That's roughly 1.3 million every single minute. Those are important stats. But the most important stat is that trade with Canada creates 8 million jobs in the United States. In my adopted state of New York trades more with Canada than the next 4 countries combined, and it provides 600,000 jobs in the state of New York. Remember, 35 of the 50 states in this great country call Canada their #1 export market. And as we sit here today in the hub of so much of that activity, recognizing once again the significance of the Canada-U.S. partnership, it is a distinct privilege for me to introduce you to a man who understands that partnership better than the most people. An all-American Canadian. Son Excellence, le très honorable David Johnston, Gouverneur Général du Canada, His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor General of Canada.
Thanks, John. That's lovely. Thanks, John. That's good. Thank you very much, John. Robert, friends, and especially the students. Let me speak first to the students from the 2 best high schools in New York. So my question to you is, which are the 2 best schools in the United States? I hear a confusion there. Is it Bronx and Stuyvesant? Now, here's a more difficult question. Which are the 2 best schools in North America? Stunned into silence, huh? My grandchildren, again, this is to the students, call me Grandpa Book because I always bring a book and read it to them. There are 9 of them. As a matter of fact, I'm watching my BlackBerry because our number 4 daughter is having contractions every 20 minutes now, so number 10 grandchild may be born very soon. So I always bring them a book and leave it with them. And the book I'm going to recommend to the Bronx and Stuyvesant students is a book by Edward Rutherford called New York. He writes historical fiction. So he'll tell you about the history of this great city. And of course, it has the Dutch stream and the English stream, and yours 2 schools represent those traditions. So it's Edward Rutherford. It's called New York. He's written 7 or 8 books. His first one was Sarum, about the town of Salisbury. His second was London, about London. His third was Ruska, about Russia. His fourth was The Forest, about the area surrounding London. His fifth and sixth were the Princes of Ireland and the Rebels of Ireland. Then his 7th was New York, and the 8th is just out called Paris. So if you want to learn more about your city, Rutherford. Just another word or 2 with the students. Young people have such enormous promise, particularly at this time when change is our friend, and learning how to take ideas and craft them into new products and services is so important. I'll just mention 2. This is a BlackBerry. Do you know where the BlackBerry comes from? It comes from Waterloo, the place where I lived until 2.5 years ago. And it was born out of the University of Waterloo. And the company started when a 4th-year engineering student by the name of Mike Lazaridis was on his co-op term. At Waterloo, the students intersperse 8 4-month academic terms with 6 4-month work terms. And typically, they go to work for an employer and they're paid. But many of them actually start their own companies on the work term. And Mike in his 4th year started what became BlackBerry. And at the end of 4 months, the company was coming along. So he said to the associate dean, I need another 4 months. Okay, but that's it. 4 more months came along, company going better, wanted another 4 months. That's it. You got to come back. He didn't come back. He didn't finish his degree. But the reason he didn't was by that time he had 3 people that were part of his partners, and they'd left other good propositions to join this fledgling venture, and he felt a moral obligation to them. And from that came this great company, BlackBerry. It wasn't all bad on the university front. Mike became chancellor of the university, so he was giving out degrees rather than receiving them. But it's a wonderful story of what a young person can do. Rob also mentioned OpenText, a company that, there's a little history here for the students. OpenText was the Oxford English Dictionary project. The Oxford English Dictionary is one of the great lexicons of human history. From 1850 to 1903, Alexander Graham Murray, a Scot, and it took a Scot to do this, put together a lexicon of the English language. So he identified each word in the English language in terms of its first appearance in print and its meaning at that time. And then he traced that word down through the decades and the centuries as it changed and added other meanings. A very interesting historical sleuthing job. He did it by having thousands of volunteers who kept manual cards from reading as early a manuscript as they could in terms of tracing the root of that word. And they recorded on this card then its first appearance and its meaning and what was the source, its second, its third, etc. And they submitted these cards to Murray. In over 53 years of hard work, he produced the Oxford English Dictionary. Around about 20 years ago, the inheritors of this great project see now we're time for second edition. But they didn't have the volunteer army that they did, and they needed a search engine that would take massive amounts of literature, identify words, develop their meaning or understanding at the particular time. And that search engine didn't exist. So the president of the University of Waterloo went with a couple of computer scientists to Oxford, knocked on the door and said, we'd like to build a search engine for the second edition of the OED. What company do you represent, sir? We don't represent a company because this is too fundamental. This is fundamental computer science. We think we can do it. And with some grants from granting agencies, these two professors sat down with 5 or 6 undergraduate students in their work terms, and they produced the search engine that did the second edition. That search engine, we didn't have the bandwidth in southwestern Ontario to commercialize it. It went to California, to Silicon Valley, and it became the search engine for Yahoo and Google. What we kept in southwestern Ontario was the within business databases, and that became the company OpenText, which was one of the first tenants on the Research and Technology Park at the University of Waterloo. Why do I tell you those two stories? I tell you because it was young people with great ideas and tremendous tenacity that brought these two important developments to us: the Oxford English Dictionary, the search engine, BlackBerry with communication around the world, and there'll be many others. I'm thrilled to be here in New York City because I can think of no other place in the world in which business, media, finance, technology, and entrepreneurship converge with such strength, creativity, and influence. And I can think of no location within the city where this nexus of forces generates more energy than right here at NASDAQ in Times Square. L'intersection historique entre Broadway et la 7e Avenue est l'endroit parfait pour parler de la croisée de la recherche scientifique et de l'esprit d'entrepreneuriat, ou plus précisément des façons d'encourager la recherche et de lancer nos innovations sur les marchés commerciaux. This historic junction of Broadway and 7th is the perfect location for us to talk about the intersection of scientific research and entrepreneurial zeal. And I just gave you 2 stories of that. Or more precisely, about how we can spur research and bring the innovations we nurture to commercial markets. Let me thank David Wicks, Rob Phillips, NASDAQ for their wonderfully generous hospitality and enthusiasm this morning. I don't think we could have a more fitting venue for this discussion, given NASDAQ's leadership in revolutionizing trading and the fact that the companies it trades are on the cutting edge of innovations such as MDC Partners. I very much look forward to my discussion with David Doft in just a few minutes, and I'm so very pleased that we have the young people from Bronx and Stuyvesant with us today. Over the course of my mandate as Governor General, I've been placing so much emphasis on learning, research, and innovation because they are pillars of the country my fellow citizens in Canada want to build, and the kind of world we want for all people. One that is smart and caring, one with keener minds and kinder hearts, one in which men and women know true freedom, reach their full potential, and enjoy lives that are rewarding, fulfilling, and meaningful. And that's, of course, a passion that our two countries share, equality of opportunity for all, and from that equality of opportunity to building excellence on a world scale. Learning, research, and innovation have been a passion and interest for me for 50 years. I spent my whole life in universities until 2 years ago. As a matter of fact, I'm on a 1-year leave of absence from my law firm. I was supposed to go and practice law, and I was asked to stay on for a year or two to be a professor at my first university law school. And when I was given this 1-year leave, my senior said, well, go and be a prof for a while, and when you've got the courage to face the real world, come and we'll teach you how to practice law. I go and see them regularly, and now when I see them, there's panic in their faces because they think I may actually do that, and they'll have to teach me how to practice law. But what I've been so focused on is how men and women, boys and girls gain, develop, and use knowledge to improve the human condition. The past 2.5 years in this current role have given me a special opportunity to share what I know. They've enabled me to travel widely across my country and around the world. We just came back from Ghana, Botswana, South Africa, for example. Before that, Holland, and before that, Rome, to compare my understanding of learning, research, and innovation with that of others. And this spirit of sharing individual knowledge to bring about greater collective wisdom brings us all here today. What we're really doing is furthering something I call the diplomacy of knowledge. It simply means our willingness and ability to work across disciplinary boundaries and international borders to uncover, share, and refine knowledge. Students of history appreciate that civilization's greatest advances often came not wholly from within certain disciplines, but at the intersections of different disciplines. And two of the greatest innovation incubators of all time, in fact, are very close by. They're vivid physical manifestations of the value of interdisciplinary collaboration. One, at Bell Labs, just across the Hudson River in New Jersey, leaders are acutely conscious of the need to cultivate teams of specialists from a variety of fields. Some were obvious: physics, chemistry, engineering, mathematics, electronics, metallurgy. But others weren't so plain: physiology, psychology, meteorology. But nevertheless, they were essential to success. And right here in New York City, in fact, right in this corner, the process of interdisciplinary innovation in the startup community has been more organic, as a critical mass of engineers, scientists, programmers, entrepreneurs, and investors have gradually gravitated to the capital of media, advertising, finance, and fashion, to create less of an organization of innovation and more a geography of innovation, a modern-day innovation-driven equivalent of Renaissance Florence, which was the cradle of the Renaissance, which has propelled New York to the position of second-largest center of technology startups in the world. And I know that New Yorkers and members of NASDAQ are tuned to the requirements of innovation. Later today, we'll visit the Center for Urban Science and Progress at NYU, a new initiative in this city, a unique public-private research center that uses New York City as its laboratory and classroom to help cities around the world become more productive, livable, equitable, and resilient. And a Canadian university, the University of Toronto, is a partner with NYU in this CUSP endeavor. Knowing that progress comes most rapidly and profoundly when people from different backgrounds and specialties work together, I'm delighted to know that men and women from an array of fields with vastly different experiences are here today: entrepreneurs, investors, communicators, and academics. The young people will know Steve Jobs. He once said, "I'm known as a technologist, but I'm not a technologist. I'm a guy who joined the humanities and the arts to technology." The diplomacy of knowledge also requires us to operate across borders. While such actions can be conducted locally, regionally, and nationally, they are most potent when we in Canada and the U.S. cross our shared border to cultivate interactions among researchers, scientists, students, investors, and entrepreneurs. I call that ICE, which is a nice Canadian acronym that stands for Intellectual Capital Exchange. We should not see ourselves as competitors in learning and research and innovation, but collaborators. One of my favorite metaphors would be very close to the home of you students because you study Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson once referred to the candle of knowledge, the light from a candle representing knowledge. And he said, when you light your unlit candle from my lit candle, my light is not diminished, it's enhanced. And of course, that candle of knowledge illuminates so much of the world. I'm so taken by that metaphor that on my coat of arms there is a candle representing learning. I should also tell you there are 5 books, and those 5 books represent each of my 5 daughters because learning and knowledge and values are transmitted through them. This candle light in physics is called candle power. Interesting play on words. I think I can say without arrogance that Canadians make excellent partners when it comes to increasing candle power or increasing ICE, intellectual capital exchange, and identify 3 qualities in our favor that are most helpful to this transmission. First of all, we believe deeply in the intrinsic value of learning from one another and sharing knowledge widely. Jefferson's candle. We came by this belief early and of necessity. The very survival of the first European settlers to Canada was wholly dependent on their willingness to learn from the local Aboriginal populations. As a matter of fact, the first person to hold the job that I currently occupy was Samuel de Champlain, first governor of New France. And in 1608, his settlement in Nova Scotia only survived that first winter because the local people, the indigenous people, shared fresh meat with these starving settlers and taught them how to make a tea from the needles of evergreen trees, which in fact was an antidote to scurvy, which would have decimated the population. Second, we've made quality education freely or affordable, accessible to all. Quality education. Education has been such an important platform for Canadians throughout our history, and of course for Americans as well. By making education available to all, generations of Canadians have been able to overcome barriers that exist in all countries: racism, poverty, class immobility, and achieve their true potential as individuals. One of our great novelists in Canada is a novelist by the name of Hugh MacLennan, and he once referred to Canadians as a bunch of losers. And he didn't mean people that lost Stanley Cup competitions. He meant that, like the United States, 99% plus of our population came from other countries with nothing but the shirt on their backs. No particular privilege, very often oppressed, chased out of the country for a variety of reasons, but all were courageous in choosing a new land and had one firm determination that life shall be better for their children than it was for them. And the key to that, of course, was an educational system accessible to all. And third, we encourage new Canadians to retain and celebrate those aspects of their heritage that don't conflict with the time-honored values that have made our country such a success. This balanced approach, this embrace of multiculturalism, enriches our country by incorporating the best that others bring. Our penchant for practicing the diplomacy of knowledge is perhaps most evident in communications. Again, we came by this talent early and of necessity. Our country's vast landmass and sparse population have prompted generations of Canadian engineers, entrepreneurs, and scholars to think deeply about and work closely to overcome the challenges of communicating information and knowledge across sweeping distances. And let me just mention some of the heroes in this great transmission of learning. Sandford Fleming hit upon the idea of standard time to make communications of all kinds more consistent and reliable, and that's why we have different time zones around the world. Alexander Graham Bell's signature creation set the stage for 20th century telephony and the 21st century revolution in global communications. I mentioned Mike Lazaridis, the inventor of BlackBerry, a wireless mobile device, generations of which link ever-growing numbers of people throughout the world. And Marshall McLuhan, his concept of the global village, enabled all the planet's citizens to appreciate the consequences of the new world we're building through our development and use of information and communications technologies. Again, for the students, let me leave you with just a small lesson in history. What revolutionized Western Europe from the 16th century to the 19th century was the printing press. It took Europe from a backward medieval society and pushed it in advance of Islam, of India and China, civilizations that had been more advanced for most of the 2 millennia. It was the printing press. It was a new way of communicating, a new way of learning. It took 3 centuries for the printing press to reach a majority of the people of Western Europe. It's taken the internet less than a decade to reach a majority of the population of the world. That's the dimension of this new communication revolution and how quickly it's penetrating. Today, many Canadian companies continue this heritage of innovation. BlackBerry, which I mentioned, OpenText, which I mentioned, MDC Partners are prime examples of the innovation-focused Canadian-based firms that recognize that their futures depend on their ability to cultivate innovative practices and products and then nurture expanding markets for them. These companies rely on their partnership with Americans, including the NASDAQ OMX exchange, and you heard some of the impressive figures of how successful Canadian companies have been in raising capital through this marvelous exchange. To equip them with the capital and the visibility they need to spur technological advances and make inroads for these innovations into U.S. and global markets. I've used that word innovation quite a bit so far. It's a word that sometimes gets bandied about. We all use it frequently in many different ways, so much so that it's no longer anchored in any universal meaning. So what exactly is it? Well, one of my favorite books from 2012 is The Idea Factory by John Gertner. In it, he tells the story of Bell Labs that I mentioned a moment ago, just across the Hudson River. This organization is one of history's greatest innovation incubators, spawning some of the 20th century's most influential communication technologies: the transistor, the integrated circuit, the cellular telephone, the satellite. Jack Morton at Bell Labs was a hard-charging engineer who played a key role in the success of its large development department. One of his more famous tasks was creating a plan to take the transistor from laboratory to market. Morton was one of the first people to see innovation as it truly is, not a simple action, but a total process of interrelated parts, like a very sophisticated synchronized gear or an ecosystem. Morton wrote that innovation is not just the discovery of new phenomena, nor the development of new products or manufacturing techniques, nor the creation of new markets. Rather, it's the integration of all these things to achieve a common industrial goal. And he would later add a corollary to his insight. He maintained that innovation had not occurred unless you manufactured the thing in substantial quantities and found a market to sell large numbers of it. At the core of innovation lies not just the value of pure science, but also a fundamental economic imperative. True innovation isn't merely discovering and understanding, it must also trigger advanced manufacturing and culminate in selling. Some people look on selling as a four-letter word. In fact, it's 7. Creating a deep culture of innovation is a responsibility shared by all levels of government, our schools, from primary to postgraduate, philanthropic foundations, and all elements of the private sector. From the smallest businesses to big industry associations to the largest multinational corporation. I'm happy to report that we in Canada have a newfound grasp on this essential meaning of innovation. We understand that productivity, competitiveness, economic growth, and lasting prosperity in our country will be driven in large measure by science, by research and development, and by speeding innovations from laboratories to people, households, workplaces, and cities across our country and around the world, spurred across, of course, by great young people like those from Stuyvesant and Bronx here today. And we don't just understand it. We in Canada, we like to think are doing something about it. We're increasing our investments in early-stage risk capital. We're helping create large-scale venture capital funds. We're changing visa requirements to attract more foreign workers with high-tech skills. And we're supporting incubator and accelerator organizations to expand the services of these organizations to businesses and entrepreneurs. A prime example is Business Development Bank of Canada Venture Capital, a multi-billion-dollar fund that now partners with Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade to extend the Canadian Technology Accelerator Program to Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and right here in New York City. This program hosts selected technology small and medium enterprises in prime global markets for several months, providing them with office space, mentoring, networking opportunities, and access to key players in local business and high-tech communities. Canada's Consulate General in New York works with approximately 300 technology companies, 24 of which participate in the accelerator. It's been quite successful in several key international centers, and I expect many of you here today will be in touch with Canadian firms through the program in the near future. CTA alumni are instrumental in further sparking the diplomacy of knowledge between our two countries. The founders of countries such as Elevate and Datacratic have contributed in creating a network for expat Canadian entrepreneurs in New York City called the N100. I salute the men and women of these organizations for their essential efforts to realize and share knowledge across borders. Starting in 1996, research investments increased dramatically. In fact, there were 11 years where investments increased by 11% per year, and those investments have continued to grow. This ongoing financial commitment has enabled Canada to emerge as a world leader in basic research. A 2011 study conducted by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation in Washington praised Canada's performance. It noted that government-funded university research accounted for 0.39% of GDP compared to 0.24% in the U.S. I mention these figures to compare Canada's performance with that of the U.S., a world leader in innovation, and not as an expression of competition between our countries. To repeat what I said earlier, Canadians and Americans should be partners in learning, research, and innovation. In fact, we must work together across disciplines, organizations, boundaries, and borders to spur research and development and speed innovation from laboratories to people. Working closely together has always been the secret to success on our shared continent. We've become so good at it that even our big achievements garner little acclaim. An example of our successful yet quiet collaboration is the Nexus program. It accelerates travel and trade between our nations and promotes safety and security, proving that openness and security is not a zero-sum game. We can and must have both. The Canada-U.S. bilateral relationship is a model for the world. It's founded on values of democracy, respect, rule of law, free markets. No two other nations have ties as close as Canada and the United States. Canada is the United States' largest trading partner, its largest foreign energy supplier. Speaking before a joint session of Canada's Parliament more than 50 years ago, President Kennedy described impeccably the enduring ties that bind our two countries. He said, "Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies." Back then, we defined necessity as our shared need to safeguard ourselves, our friends, and our way of life at the height of the Cold War. Today, our definition of necessity is different but no less daunting. We must contain health care costs before they cripple our ability to take action on our other pressing priorities. We must reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and minimize the harmful impacts of their use on our environment. We must rejuvenate our physical infrastructure, especially the roads, bridges, sewers, transit systems, electrical grids in our cities after decades of neglect. And we must regenerate our manufacturing industries and the urban industrial communities that rely on the jobs and high standard of living that these industries create for generations of workers and their families. Unprecedented opportunities await American scientists, researchers, entrepreneurs, and businesses to invest, conduct research, and build partnership with Canadians so that together we can bring about and use innovations to overcome the challenges we share. I'm here today at Times Square, one of America's most dynamic hubs of innovation, to urge you to work with Canadians as allies in innovation to take advantage of these opportunities. Together, let us practice the diplomacy of knowledge. Let us harness our discoveries and develop, manufacture, and sell them to meet human needs. And let us use our innovations to solve our most profound problems and create the smart and caring countries and world of which we all dream. Let me just leave you with my two favorite lines from George Bernard Shaw, again, especially to the young people. Some people see things as they and wonder why. We dream of things that ought to be and ask why not. Merci.
So, Your Excellency, that was a fascinating speech, and I'm looking forward to following up and delving into some of those themes. I'm particularly pleased to be here because my company, MDC Partners, has benefited from substantial innovation in our industry, in the broader marketing communications industry. And we compete in an industry against much larger firms that have been around for decades, yet we've been able to build a company that is born in the digital age, in the internet age, and see the benefits of innovating on behalf of corporations in order to drive tangible results. And so we're founded in Canada, domiciled in Toronto, and Canada has done such a fantastic job of supporting innovation, as you elaborated on. But this can be challenging in a world where if you talk about most successful innovators, they talk about their failures more often than they talk about their successes. So how has Canada supported entrepreneurs in this iterative process of innovation that has so much failures, tweaks, and improvement before the ultimate success in the marketplace?
Large question, David. You try to build an ecosystem, and you try to build it, I think, region by region. And each ecosystem will have some different peculiarities depending upon where you are. My last job was president of the University of Waterloo, from which BlackBerry came and from which OpenText came. What was unique about that country, about that particular region of the country, is that it was actually settled by Mennonites in 1800, people who came north from Pennsylvania seeking land. And they were barn raisers. They were people that helped one another's neighbors, not simply Mennonites, but other settlers as they came in. And out of that spirit of sharing and helping came a collaborative ecosystem which was very precious. I used to give a speech called What's in the Water in Waterloo? And there's a large river that flows through it called the Grand River, and the first slide was the Grand River running through. The second was a slide of a Mennonite barn raising project, an overhead shot of 100 people building a neighbor's barn, very busy, all bringing their own talents and their materials to help that neighbor get a start. And the third slide was the second slide and the first slide. It showed the barn raising in the middle of the river. That's what was in the water in Waterloo. So it's a very broad generalization, but what one tries to do is to get that collaborative spirit where you have different areas of expertise, different people with different skill sets working together to improve whatever the trade, goods, service that you're building. And in the modern day, institutions of learning have a very great role to play with this. The quality of your primary and secondary school system, the universities and colleges, and how well you move those ideas and those talent from those institutions into the applied area. And I guess that's what the story of Bell Labs was trying to tell us as well.
Absolutely. The Gertner book is fascinating, and I read it recently as well. And one of the things that stuck out to me was that the executives at AT&T, which funded Bell Labs, had a great insight, was that to drive true innovation, they needed to look beyond this year or next year, but look out decades. But in a what have you done for me lately world, corporations are beholden to public investors and delivering short-term earnings. How do you bridge the gap, or how can companies bridge the gap, or how can governments help companies bridge the gap between the short-term desires of, say, public shareholders versus the long-term innovation opportunities?
Well, I'd say two things about that, David. One is the point that you make so well, that one must have a longer time horizon, certainly than a quarter and certainly than a year. And in organizing your business enterprise, one must be prepared to have some patient capital going into a portion of it, and typically at least 5 or more years out. Secondly, one must look to the other partnerships of institutions that do have a longer time horizon and are prepared to do it. That Oxford English Dictionary project came about because there were some crazy computer scientists who thought in terms of 5-year projects and were prepared to invest their time and effort in, and were able to attract public research money because the problems were so interesting. They didn't see the immediate output or successful product in 12 years' time, 12 months' time. And then they engaged young people to enjoy this business of just discovering, but from it came a very powerful search engine. So that's one dimension. The other, I would say, is that the technology transfer is not linear. It's not from basic science to experiment to application to commercialization. It's back and forth in a very messy way along that continuum. And very often the practical problem in the marketplace will drive that chain right back into the basic research, the fundamental problems that one can't easily discover. And the more you get traffic back and forth along that busy continuum, the better, with great respect for people who operate at different parts of it. I think that's an important message. I'm just going to end with another BlackBerry story. When Mike Lazaridis was age 37, his company was doing pretty well. He gave 1/3 of his net worth to start what's called the Perimeter Institute of Theoretical Physics. A 37-year-old guy says, I guess I'm worth some money. And he put it into a basic research institute to look at physics at the quantum level, because he said that classical laws of Newton and Einstein and Maxwell and Clerk and others behave differently at the very small level, the quantum, the less than an atom size level. And I want to figure that out. I want to figure that out because I'm not sure whether it'll lead to a new product in a year or two, but all of our telecommunication and so much else in microelectronics has been built on Newton's discoveries of 300 or 400 years ago and Einstein's that are now 100 years old. And all of a sudden we have some new stuff that just doesn't have a basic explanation. So that's what he did. He put $150 million of his own money into an Institute for Theoretical Research. And then the next thing he did is he put $125 million of his own money into an institute for quantum computing to build the first quantum computer that was taking some of this new physics at the quantum level to provide a new platform on which we could put the pluses and minuses so that Moore's law, which says we double the size of a semicircuit every 18 months, will run into its limitations. You can't squeeze any more electrical charges on a little strip of copper on a bed of silicon. So we went inside, they go inside the atom and they calibrate the spins, and they use those spins as the new basis to put their plus and minuses. But my point of that long story is back and forth across this continuum with different actors in different places.
Right. So that was one of the other interesting takeaways from the Bell Labs story was it brought together thinkers and developers, right? And in this case, the funding of the thinking, of the theory, of the discoveries is crucial, but then getting those to the marketplace is equally as crucial to get true innovation, as you spoke to. So there are pockets of that sort of research all over the world. NASA comes to mind for me, that has hundreds of thousands of patents that I would think just sit there. So how can governments enable that intellectual property to be tapped and developed for true innovation?
Well, I'd say three things, David. One is that two takeaways from your comments about Bell Labs is that, first of all, it was not a closed shop. Bell Labs was really terrific in penetrating the universities and research establishments, not only in the United States, but around the world. And of course, the best way they did that was they brought in this great talent. I mean, they knew who the bright students were coming along, and they came to Bell Labs to do their work. Secondly, they were a commercial organization, and somehow they were able to bring that discipline of the marketplace into their work. They did fundamental research with Nobel Prize winners, but somehow understood the last of the messages in the Gardner book of how can you move this from lab to manufacturing to scale to large numbers. That was a remarkable transition. But the third, I think the most important thing is just the recognition of talent. The best vehicle for technology transfer is a university convocation, where you're graduating these bright students. And so, as democratic societies that believe so much in equality of opportunity, we must work passionately to be sure that the opportunity is available to every one of our citizens to extend their talent to the very utmost. And guess what happens when you do that? It reaches somewhat beyond. And from that base of talent, of course, we will have the critical mass from which these good things will happen.
In your speech, you also talked about the startup culture that's emerged here in New York, and surely it's been a boon for our business to be able to tap into some of those innovations and thought leaders. But those are insurgent organizations. At the same time, there are many large corporations here in New York and in Canada and around the world that I think struggle to evolve with the influence of technology in our world. So how can big companies become innovative organizations in the way that would achieve this broader goal?
Well, I think it's tougher, David, because as you become bigger, you lose the courage of the innocent. That ability to say, well, nobody told me I couldn't do this, and so I'll go ahead and do it. I suppose what you do is you try to work very hard to create a very open atmosphere. One of my favorite bumper stickers is minds like parachutes work best when open. And creating that sense of the skunk works, of the constant improvement, that respectfully saying to your boss, your senior, sir, we don't have to do it this way. There is another better way. Having your antenna open all the time. I used to ask my colleagues constantly in the university, if you're doing alumni affairs or you're doing the treasury function, what are the two Canadian universities and what are the two American universities that do this best of all? And sometimes those colleagues of mine wouldn't know, but the next time I asked the question, they did know. And they'd probably been to each of them to do that. So I think you do that. Looking at it from a government point of view is it's reinforcing that wonderful sense of curiosity that's innate in human beings. Those of you who have small children, as they begin to learn to speak, that word why comes in pretty quickly, doesn't it? And as parents, we sometimes get a little annoyed. Stop asking questions incessantly. Why should they stop asking questions? That's absolutely marvelous, especially when you don't know the answer, because it makes you think a little bit. one of my favorite stories of this, of government activity that led to great things, is its lovely Swords into Plowshares story. It takes a minute to tell, so bear with me. What happened in 1957 to the students from Bronx and Stuyvesant that was very important in terms of outer space? Sputnik went up, eh? And we in the West said, my heavens, the Russians have put the first vehicle up into space. That's a terrible, terrible defeat for our science, and it's also a very great military threat. They can launch a bomb from a satellite. So President Eisenhower did a couple things. He built the interstate highway system to connect American cities, but he also started the project that led to the Americans ultimately putting a man on the moon. But the final thing he did was he started something known as DARPANET, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency Network. And that was a communication network that connected all the cities in the United States because he needed a fail-safe method of communication if an atomic or hydrogen bomb dropped on Washington or New York or Colorado Springs, so that if the communication line went down, he had a spider web of other opportunities, other resilient lines of communication. And it was built at great expense, but it was never intended to be used. If it were to be used, it was the worst calamity we've seen, World War III breaking out. It was very secret, was very controlled. It was only used for testing between the Pentagon and Washington and various military stations around the United States and I guess in Canada, classified. But then being bright people, they say, this works better than the telephone. Why don't we let our scientists doing classified work in the universities get on it and communicate back and forth with the Pentagon? And then the scientists, being bright people, said, well, why don't we communicate ourselves for classified work? And then being entrepreneurial, they said, well, why don't we do it for unclassified work? And then a great thing happened. They let it get in the hands of their graduate students. And as you know, graduate students are the most irrepressible, curious, relentless, tenacious creature in the face of the earth. And that's where the internet was born, that they used this new communication technique to communicate with themselves. Now, they need a little help from Tim Berners-Lee with hypertext protocols, etc. But it's become revolutionary, huh? It's everywhere, it's flat, it's democratic, it's inexpensive, and it's transformed the world. And that all happened because some graduate students said, hey, this is something here, let's make it work.
You know, it's interesting, as a final question, because much of the innovation that's emerged, I think, in the last century has been in response to military threats. And it brings a sense of urgency that has led to very quick development of things like DARPANET, which led to the internet. In more contemporary times, how can we have that sense of urgency without military threat to drive innovations? And if you look at a country like Israel, which has seen huge innovations coming out of the military-trained technicians in that country, how can we drive that sense of urgency without war as a catalyst?
It's such an important question. The ambassador from Israel, Miriam Taves, gave me a book about 2 years ago called Innovation Nation, and it explains this phenomenon that Israel has of so innovative. And I visited the Weizmann Institute there about 2 years ago. It's a research institute with 200 scientists. There are 17 patent lawyers for the 200 scientists. My beloved University of Waterloo, we didn't have a patent lawyer on staff. Partly it's because the university actually didn't own the intellectual property. It was owned by the professors and students, and we would encourage them. But the fact that Israel is an island of 6 and 7 million people with some very hostile people around it that want to push it into sea provides a discipline that we don't have. I think our greatest enemy in the United States and Canada, in fact, is the complacency that comes from being so blessed to live in the countries we do, with the resources we have, etc. And so I go back to, I guess, our families, where we try to teach a sense of responsibility for the gifts that God has given us, and in our education system to try to teach us that we cannot be complacent, that we must develop in ourselves a sense of constant improvement, particularly improvement that is not simply our own prosperity and the accumulation of wealth in our families, but improving the lot of our neighbors. And if we realize that there is so much opportunity in this age to use intelligence to improve the lot of our neighbors, we can do so. I've just been at my 50th anniversary of my American college with my classmates, and they asked me to speak on public policy, and what I spoke on was smart and caring neighborhoods, smart and caring communities of of keener minds and kinder hearts. And I left them with the story. I'll just tell this and I'll finish, David. It takes a little bit of telling of the importance of using our smartness and the gifts to give someone a hand up as opposed to a hand up to help our neighbors. In Montreal, about 25 years ago, Mother Teresa came to speak at the Greater Montreal Prayer Breakfast, and 50 or so of us gathered with her afterwards, and one of our neighbors said, Mother Teresa, we're so moved by your work in Calcutta, what can we do? And I thought, being a university president, she'd say, write a large check to my settlement house in Calcutta, I'll put it to good use. She said, look in your own families, look in your own neighborhood. I guarantee you there's someone who needs your love and care. And her speech was covered favorably by the newspapers, but for one. And that newspaper, I guess being the Real Politic newspaper, said, let's be practical. Here's a marvelous woman. She'll probably be a saint. She became a saint. But she provides food and clothing and shelter for 200 people in Calcutta. It's a city of 20 million, half of whom live in the most dire poverty imaginable. In a country of 1 billion people, half of whom live in the most dire poverty imaginable. It's a drop in the bucket. It's just a drop in the ocean. In the comparative relativity of things, it doesn't matter for very much. That bothered me for the longest time. It's kind of ate away at my gut. And one day we'd finished a birthday party. We had 5 daughters in 7 years. Birthday parties were big deals. And the eldest daughter, who was 8, said to me at the end of the party, Dad, you know the ghost stories you tell the kids at the birthday parties? They're all lies, and the kids know they're all lies. They just pretend to be scared because they know your feelings will be hurt. Why can't you be like Dean McFarlane? He does magic at birthday parties. Dean McFarlane was the dean of the School of Journalism at my university. I was dean of law, and I had bloody Andy McFarlane. Why are you so smart? So I went to his home for a birthday party a couple months later, and there he was, Andy McFarlane, dressed in a big cape and a cap, a big tall hat, and he had a magic wand. He had a mustache like this, and he was prancing around doing magic, and the kids were mesmerized. And so I was where David was to kind of watch what was going on behind the scenes. And he holds out a glass of water and he said, I will turn this water into wine. And I thought, careful, Andy, the last time that was done 2,000 years ago, the guy had a little more power than you did. But back here where the kids couldn't see, he had a dropper with one little drop of red vegetable dye. And he dropped that into the glass. And he presented the glass, still water, but a little drop of red dye. And he said, abracadabra. And he shook it around. And that one drop of red dye suffused the whole glass and turned that water into a beautiful shade of rosé. Suffused the whole glass. And the light went on. I thought I had been thinking about the drop in the ocean of Mother Teresa's caring as a matter of physics or mathematics, relative volume. I should have seen it as chemistry, because that drop changed the culture of all of the contents in the glass. And it's changing the culture is what we're about. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Do we have time?
Thank you, David.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming in. Governor General Johnston, if I may, we'd like to present as a small memento for today the NASDAQ Crystal, Tower Crystal. So
ready to take off
very
from
much.
The things here, Rob.
Great things.
Thank you.
Come. Thank you so much, sir. Really Thank you, sir. Yeah, well, hold on, sir. Hold that up high.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I would ask that you please rise for the departure of His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor General of Canada. Thank you, everyone, for coming to NASDAQ. And please, there are refreshments over there, and let's start to enact the diplomacy of knowledge here and now. Thank you again. Thank you very much.